Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe. We are in Paris. I'm joined by Hungary's Foreign Minister, Péter Szijjarto. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
I'd like to just start off with a quick word about relations between Hungary and France. It's well known that the President, Emmanuel Macron, and your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, have been at odds in the past over various issues, including foreign policy, migration. But a few months ago, there was an official visit to France for Viktor Orban, a rather grand visit. How would you describe relations between the President and the Prime Minister?
Maybe there are two words which describe this relationship in the best way, and this is mutual respect. My Prime Minister, I know it very well, respects your President pretty much, not just because his personality, not just because his endeavors, but simply because of the fact that he's the President of France based on an election, based on the will of the French people. And the will of the French people are always respected by us. But if you look at the latest dynamic of the relationship between the two leaders, you will see that although there are issues, of course, which they disagree upon, I mean, I could consider it very normal, but they can always talk to each other in a very common sense-based, rational way, and the respect has been always there and will be always there.
Of course, I said you are Foreign Minister, and there's been big geopolitical news in the last few days. We're meeting at the end of a week where there were some surprises, I think we can say, from Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Now, he's a man who has rather complicated relations with his European neighbours, I think we can say. Your government is known to have warmer relations with Moscow than some of your neighbours. So I'd like to jump into that news, which we can discuss together after this report.
The decision to appoint him to the premiership may have come as a surprise, but his approval by Russian lawmakers less so. Fulfilling widespread expectations, the Russian parliament has confirmed Mikhail Mishustin as the country's new prime minister. A relatively unknown technocrat, Mishustin has presided over Russia's tax service for the past 10 years, where he was credited with modernizing the country's fiscal administration system. Widely seen as someone who could bring positive changes to the country's lagging economy, he has vowed to focus on social issues and improving living standards as president.
The president tasked the government to be at the cutting edge of the country's development, to ensure economic growth and the creation of new jobs. It's the basis for efficient social policy and, of course, without the high pace of economic development, the social development of our country would languish.
In a surprise announcement Wednesday, Vladimir Putin announced plans to expand the power and independence of Russia's parliament and state council at the expense of the presidency, prompting the entire government to resign just hours later. Though the Russian president framed the changes as an effort to strengthen democracy, many observers speculate that he is instead laying the groundwork for maintaining his hold on power long after his final term is up in 2024. It wouldn't be the first time Vladimir Putin used or created loopholes to continue pulling the Kremlin's strings. When his term limits expired in 2008, he swapped to the prime minister's seat, designating his protege Dmitry Medvedev as presidential placeholder until later returning to the presidency in 2012.
Péter Szijjarto, what's your reading of what's going on in Russia? We have heard from, for example, Alexei Navalny or the former Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Kazyanov that they believe President Putin is paving the way to hold on to power one way or another beyond his current term limits.
Look, there are multiple approaches which you can apply when you run a foreign policy. I rather apply the approach which tries to avoid commenting on domestic issues of other countries.
Well, your government does have quite strong relations with Russia, as I said. Would your government be happy to see President Putin in power for longer?
For us, the relationship to Russia is important, no question. Why? Because we are a small Central European country which imports almost 100% of its gas supply from Russia. And why? For fun? No. Then why? Because of infrastructure. This is the only way how we can run our economy, how we can run our industry, and how we can heat the flats and houses of our people. That we have to be in a normal relationship with Russia. Look, I can tell you that I'm responsible for international energy negotiations as well, and I can tell you that whatever I have agreed so far with Gazprom, with Minister Novak, or with CEO Miller, they were always kept. And this is the most important thing for us, that whatever we agree, they keep it. You know, we are a small country. We're not going to be a game changer in geopolitical issues, so you know, everybody has to know which weight category is involved.
Well, you talk about a normal relationship. Currently, of course, the EU sanctions are still in place on Russia that were imposed after Russian annexation of Crimea, when Russian backing was given to Eastern Ukrainian separatists. Your government has long talked about what it sees as the merits of lifting EU sanctions on Russia. You spoke about that normal relationship, as you say. Is Prime Minister Orban intending to use his EU veto to bring an end to the sanctions?
No, we're definitely not going to do so. So, as we have never broken the European unity on the sanctions regarding Russia, we're not going to do it anytime. So, we will always agree with the mainstream in this regard. But I would like to draw your attention to three very important or very exciting issues. There have been sanctions, you say it very well. But I think it would be very important to have a look at how it is possible that under sanctions, only within 1 year, 2018, Germany has increased its trade with Russia by 56%. France has increased its trade with Russia by 40%. Italy has increased its trade with Russia by 37%. The three continental G7 countries. So in this report, you have already said it like twice or three times, like European mainstream media usually does, so it's not a personal issue, that we have such a strong relationship with Russia.
Well, there's been open praise from Viktor Orban for President Putin.
No. What kind of praise you say? We always try to make a relationship based on mutual respect. But if you look at the readout of a press conference between President Macron and the Russian president, or the recent press conference between the German chancellor and the Russian president, you will see that there's a voice of mutual respect. So singling out the prime minister of a small
leaders of hypocrisy.
No. I don't say. I just say that we have to look at the facts. We have to look at the facts. And then, I mean, singling out a leader of a small Central European country for media is always much easier
than... Well, of course, when I interview French or German leaders, I will ask them those questions as well.
And remember, 56% and 40%. That was the increase between the trade between Germany and Russia and France and Russia. Very exciting. We Hungarians, we lost $8.5 billion of export opportunities since we have introduced the sanctions. These are the facts.
So it would be beneficial to your country if the sanctions were to end?
You know, it doesn't matter whether it would be beneficial or not, because the sanctions will not be concluded for sure, because we see that the European unity will definitely not be broken, not by us for sure.
I'd like to move on to talking about rule of law in Hungary. Just in the last couple of days, the European Parliament issued a statement that rule of law had worsened in Hungary. It's an issue that's already been under scrutiny by the EU. Your reaction to this declaration from the European Parliament?
Look, I think such kind of declarations will be passed by the European Parliament in the upcoming years, quite many occasions. So we'll be able to speak about such kind of issues, because until the majority of the European Parliament is constructed this way, that it is a socialist, liberal, green-oriented majority, you know, there will be resolutions like that. We have to understand
that... Well, the biggest group is the centre-right European People's Party that your party, Fidesz, has been part of for many years. It is suspended currently, but it's been part of for many years.
Yeah, but there's a big debate whether we should continue as member of the European People's Party, because European People's Party's focus has been moved to the left, and this is something that we absolutely don't like. So now we have to see whether we can pull this focus back more to the right, and then we have to make our own decision whether we stay in the European People's Party or not.
I'd just like to come back to rule of law matters. In the past week, there's been an opinion issued by the Advocate General of the European Court of Justice, which concerns Hungary. Now, he's found that restrictions brought in 2017 on the financing from abroad of NGOs are incompatible with EU law. In general, these Advocate General opinions, they are followed by rulings at the ECJ. So do you accept this opinion that Hungarian law has gone too far in this case?
This is not a ruling, right? This is an opinion.
It's an opinion at this point.
We don't accept that opinion. We don't accept that because we don't accept the approach that NGOs would be above the law. NGOs must comply with the law, and NGOs must be transparent as well.
Well, the Advocate General says that the law is disproportionate and unjustified. It unduly restricts the free movement of capital, which is a fundamental principle of all EU membership.
But it's not about that. It's not about that. It's about transparency. It's about national security. It's about the fact that NGOs must be transparent, NGOs must comply with the law, as political parties must be transparent, NGOs must be transparent as well. So they have to reveal from which sources they get their finances, especially if it comes from abroad. I mean, NGOs, what is the role of these NGOs in Hungary, or what is their goal? They want to influence the public opinion, right?
Well, there could be a question about the threshold of the donations.
Carry on. Maybe it would make sense. I will be short, I promise, so you will raise the other question. So, they would like to influence the the opinion of the people, right? But if they want to do so, and if they got financing from that from outside, meaning that there is an attempt from outside of the country to influence the opinion of the Hungarian people, then everybody does have the right to know which sources this money is coming from. That's it.
Funding is, of course, a major concern, as you say, concerning foreign actors. But just on that specifically, the Advocate General said that he believes the threshold of 500,000 forints is excessively low, given the gravity of resulting interference. So perhaps Hungary could extricate itself from this by just raising that threshold. It's not much more than €1,000, I think that.
Yeah, it's like 1,600 or something. Yeah, I mean, this is his opinion. Our opinion is different, and.
How much influence, really, though, could a foreign actor have for €1,600 in the grand scheme of things?
I mean, if you put it on a pile, that's going to be big. So, I mean, I understand that the gentleman doesn't like the ruling in Hungary, but it is totally in line with the European regulations.
Well, as a judge, he would say he's acting under the law.
I mean, we understand once again that this is an opinion. We are looking forward to get the ICD ruling. Let's look at the ruling, and then we can come back to this issue, of course.
In part one of our programme, I spoke to one of the new European commissioners, Elisa Ferreira. She's in charge of cohesion policy. Now, this relates to our discussion about rule of law, because she's told me she's very much in favour of bringing in conditionality on the issuing of EU funding with regard to rule of law in member states. That does indicate that Hungary could be in line to lose some of its cohesion policy funding. Does that give you cause to rethink government policies?
It's very interesting and exciting what the Commissioner thinks about that, but it doesn't really matter, because there are European regulations, European contracts, based on which there are the set of conditions what you have to fulfill in order to get the cohesion funds. Because there's one big misunderstanding, Cohesion funds are not like the outcomes of generosity of the Western European countries. It's not like humanitarian donations. You have to fulfill your obligations, like you have to open your market. You have to allow foreign capital come in. That foreign companies will bring profit out of your country, as it has been happening in the case of Central European countries mostly. 70%, imagine, 70% according to the European Commission evaluation. 70% of all EU funds coming to Central Europe, they return to Western Europe through the Western European companies being active on our market. So we have fulfilled our obligations. And based on that, we get the European funds. The European cohesion funds have nothing to do with political and subjective issues.
Well, on the subject of European funds, in November, your government accepted a record penalty of around €1.6 billion.
Yeah, but we are still debating about that, so it's a technical issue.
Which is still under debate, indeed. Yes. It was related to claims of mismanagement of EU funding. So this is still under debate. What is your government doing? Is it examining mismanagement of EU funds in Hungary? Do you accept that there has been mismanagement?
No, we don't, because we use the EU funds properly, and we are debating about this issue. So there was a technical decision on our side in order to be able to continue the investments, not to stop them, because that would harm the economy. But we are debating about this issue. So, but we are continuing the investments in the meantime, so it's a technical decision.
So ultimately, you intend not to pay that penalty of €1.6 billion?
No, actually, we are debating about that, and we hope that we will win the debate.
And not pay the penalty?
Yeah, because we want to win the debate.
More recently, there have also been claims about alleged misuse of farming subsidies. There's been a big investigation by the New York Times. It quotes Joseph Angyan, a former minister of Mr. Orban's. The paper claims, and Mr. Joseph Angyan claims, State Secretary, that the paper claims that Mr. Orban is using farm subsidies to enrich families and friends, selling off land to people he's connected to. So just to put that question to you from the New York Times investigation, is that the case?
It's very exciting again that a former state secretary who is personally and emotionally, is painful for him to be pushed out of government because of unprofessional performance. Now he's accusing Hungary, and then a Hungarian journalist who works in Hungary writes a report to the New York Times, and then it is portrayed as if it was a piece of New York Times. So it's more colorful and more interesting than that. We could address in a couple of seconds, but you can be sure that we are a traditionally agricultural country. And we use the EU funds coming from the common agricultural policy properly. We are ready for any kind of investigation. We are ready for any kind of, procedures run by the European Commission.
So you disprove the claims?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
The New York Times went into government land records, for example, to look at who's been buying what land.
This is a personal, emotional issue. I know Mr. Anyan very well. He used to serve as a state secretary. It was painful for him that he cannot do it further on. So, I mean, I don't know why. We know why. I mean, I know why he does it, but to be honest, I don't understand.
You're saying that it's a personal motive?
Yeah, right.
Looking at Brexit, still a big issue. Your Prime Minister recently praised the UK's Prime Minister in the highest terms, calling Boris Johnson one of Europe's bravest politicians. He clearly has a lot of support in the UK as well, winning the election in December. Does your government support the direction that Boris Johnson is indicating he'll take on the future relationship, much looser relations with the EU, deregulation, decoupling from EU regulations?
First, I think we have to speak here about two issues. One, that we regret that the British people decided to leave the European Union, but we respect it. In this case, I think he's really a brave person. I know him personally, a personal friend, so let's say I cross fingers for him to be successful. But since I'm not a British, it doesn't matter what I think about that. Now, regarding the UK-EU relations, I think that it would be great if we could come to an agreement about a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, because without that, I think European economy will face some further challenges which we don't want.
There have been publicly expressed fears by many people about dumping, the UK deregulating, producing cheaper goods, and the EU economy, your economy, suffering.
Look, I think, UK is one of our most important trading partners. UK companies are very important investors in Hungary. So for us, it's very important to have the least possible hurdles and obstacles in the economic trade and investment relation between EU and the United Kingdom. But there must be an agreement reached which will be based on mutual or reciprocal interests. So I can tell you now what will be the details. Now, what I say is a principal position: least possible hurdles and the easiest,
regulatory alignment.
the closest possible cooperation. Now, what it means technically will be worked out, of course, but the principle is that we should not lose a strategic ally and partner for sure.
Viktor Szijjarto, thank you very much for speaking to us on Talking Europe.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Merci.
Thanks to you for watching as well. Stay tuned to France 24.
Always trust what the correspondent tells you. When Emmanuel Soji calls us on a Friday night to say that 2 Frenchmen have been kidnapped in northern Benin, even if authorities here in Paris aren't talking about it, I know it's true because I know how hard she's worked to verify that information. I, too, was once a West Africa correspondent, and you wouldn't believe the amount of information, true or false, that people throw your way that you then have to check and double-check. A more recent example, there were the news agency wires talking about a massacre in Mali. Our correspondent, Christelle Pire, calls up, says, wait before you give the toll. I'm still fact-checking it. We want to go fast, but you know what? We waited.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.